There is a moment, in the wild, when everything shifts. Not with a charge, not with a roar, not with teeth or blood, or the kind of violence that announces itself from a distance. It shifts quietly, in the way a shadow moves when the sun changes angle. You might not even notice it happening, but somewhere in that slow, silent reorganization of space and posture and eye contact, a decision is being made, a very old decision, one that has been made 10,000 times before, on every continent where animals live in groups, and power determines survival. If you have ever watched an alpha hold a pack together, you will know there is something almost architectural about the way dominance works in the wild. It is structural, load-bearing. Remove a single pillar, and the whole arrangement begins to creak. And the others, the ones who live beneath that architecture, who rely on it for food and direction and safety, they feel the creak before anyone can see it. This is a story about that creak. It is a story about a pack of African wild dogs, also called painted wolves, and about 9 days in a dry, golden season in which everything that held them together began to loosen. 9 days in which the animals who followed began to wonder whether the animal who led was still worth following. 9 days of watching, testing, remembering. And then, on the morning of the 10th day, something changed forever. But to understand what happened in those 9 days, you have to understand what came before them. You have to understand what an alpha means to a pack like this. Stay with this, because nothing that follows makes sense without this foundation. If you find yourself coming back to the natural world for the same reason many people do, because it tells truths about life that nothing else quite manages, then stay until the end of this. What this pack did over those 9 days is one of the most precise, most patient, most quietly intelligent things ever documented in the African bush. And if you haven't already, now is a good time to make sure you don't miss what comes next. The African wild dog is not the animal most people picture when they think of apex predators on the savannah. The lion is the animal people picture, the leopard, the cheetah. These are the creatures that fill the mental landscape of Africa, all muscle and coat and compressed, barely leashed danger. The painted wolf is different. It stands roughly knee-height to a grown adult human. It weighs somewhere between 18 and 30 kilograms at the most. Its ears are enormous, almost comically so, like satellite dishes mounted on a compact, lean body, covered in a coat of black and yellow and white that looks less like camouflage and more like something improvised. No two painted wolves have the same markings. Each coat is unique. Each animal is identifiable at a glance, which matters more than it might seem, because in a society built on hierarchy and recognition and relationship, being seen clearly by the others in your group is not incidental, it is fundamental. What painted wolves lack in size, they more than compensate for in almost every other department. Their stamina is extraordinary. Where a cheetah hunts in a single explosive burst that lasts seconds, a painted wolf pack can sustain a chase for 4, 5, sometimes 6 kilometers. They run at 50, 55 kilometers per hour for that entire distance. Not many prey animals on the African savanna can match that. The ones that try usually lose. Their cooperative hunting is among the most sophisticated of any land predator on Earth. They communicate constantly during a hunt, adjusting, redirecting, splitting off to cut corners, and intercept fleeing animals. They share food with a generosity that seems almost improbable in a world defined by competition. Adults returning from a successful hunt will regurgitate meat for pups and for pack members who stayed behind to guard them. They feed the injured. They feed the elderly. A pack of painted wolves is a functioning, breathing democracy of shared investment. Everyone contributes. Everyone is fed. But that democracy operates within a structure. At the top of that structure is the alpha pair, a dominant male and a dominant female, typically the only breeding pair in the pack. Every other animal is subordinate. They defer. They make space. They signal their lower status through body postures learned early and practiced constantly. Head low, body loose, tail curved inward, movement slow and circular. These are not performances. They are the living grammar of pack life, the vocabulary through which rank is acknowledged and reinforced dozens of times a day. The alpha male this story is about had led his pack for 4 years. In the world of painted wolves, where mortality is high and tenure is short, and life is structured as a continuous negotiation between the urgent and the uncertain, 4 years of leadership is a significant thing. His coat was distinctive, heavier on the black than most, with a wide band of ochre gold across the shoulders. His ears were slightly asymmetrical, the left one higher than the right, giving him a permanently alert expression. The pack that had formed around him and his mate numbered 11 animals. A strong number, enough to take on impala and wildebeest and, on their best days, even to hold off lions from a kill. He was a good alpha, not because he was the largest or the most aggressive, though he was neither small nor mild, but because he was consistent. He set out on hunts with a confidence that communicated itself through the group. He navigated territorial boundaries with enough caution to avoid unnecessary conflict and enough assertion to defend what was the pack's. He watched over the pups with a vigilance that never seemed to switch off. His mate moved alongside him as a coherent unit, their decisions so synchronized that from a distance they appeared to share a single mind. Then, sometime around the middle of the dry season, something happened. It was not dramatic. That is always the first thing worth saying about these events. The initial rupture is almost always quiet. A hunt gone wrong that would normally be corrected by the alpha's quick, decisive rerouting. Except this time the rerouting came a second too late, and the prey broke through where it shouldn't have. A standoff at a waterhole with a pack from an adjacent territory, handled adequately, sufficiently, but not with the sharp territorial assertion the pack had come to expect. A morning when the alpha did not rise first, when he moved a little more slowly than usual, when the ears that usually tracked every sound in every direction seemed to track a few sounds a little less precisely. These things in isolation mean almost nothing. Every animal has a slow morning. Every pack endures a failed hunt. Every alpha navigates a territorial encounter that ends in a draw rather than a clear statement of dominance. But the pack noticed. This is the thing about living inside a hierarchy. Every member of that hierarchy is constantly monitoring the one above them, not aggressively, not consciously perhaps in the way a human thinks of conscious monitoring, but continuously, the way a river monitors the height of its banks, not because it is planning to overflow, but because the height of the banks is, at every moment, the most relevant structural fact about the river's world. The pack noticed the small things, and the small things accumulated. The alpha's second in command, the dominant male below him in rank, was in his second year of adulthood. He was leaner than the alpha, slightly longer in the leg, with a coat that ran heavily toward the gold end of the spectrum. He had never overtly challenged for leadership. In the 4 years the alpha had held his position, there had been no confrontation between them. The subordinate male had deferred cleanly, consistently, without visible resentment. He took his food after the alpha. He moved aside when the alpha entered a space. He hunted hard and returned to the camp and regurgitated food for the pups like every other member of the pack. But now he began to do something that, if you were not watching carefully, you might not register as anything at all. He began to hold his ground, a fraction of a second longer than usual, before deferring. That is where day one begins. The first morning of the 9-day sequence begins like most mornings in the dry season. The light comes in slow and golden over a landscape that has been stripped back to its essentials by the absence of rain. The grass is pale and low. The trees along the drainage line hold their green for as long as their roots can reach the retreating water table. The air has a quality unique to dry seasons in southern Africa, a clarity that feels almost edible, like it has been concentrated somehow, sharpened to a quality nothing else quite matches. The pack begins to rouse. They are resting in the shade of a cluster of low acacias, bodies arranged in the loose sprawl that characterizes sleeping painted wolves, limbs extended, ears relaxed, coats moving in the faint rise and fall of breathing. The pups, 6 of them, 4 months old now, have been piled into a rough heap at the center of the group, as they always are, surrounded by adults on all sides. The alpha rises first. This is typical. He stretches, shakes, scent marks the base of the nearest acacia. He moves to the edge of the shade and stands looking out across the open ground to the east. Reading the landscape in that particular way, hunting animals read it, not scanning for specific things, but absorbing the whole of it, letting the information come. Then he turns back to the pack, and the subordinate male, who has been watching from 10 meters away, rises and begins to move toward him in the usual arc, the approach that ends in the deferential body crouch that signals, as it has signaled every morning for 2 years, that the order of things is intact. He begins the arc, he begins the curve toward deference, and then he holds his body upright for just under 2 seconds before completing the signal. 2 seconds. Less than the time it takes to draw a breath and release it. The alpha barely registers it. He has already turned away to rouse the others. The moment passes, the pack mobilizes. By mid-morning they are hunting, and they run down a young impala on the edge of a dry riverbed, and everyone feeds, and the pups tumble through the adults' legs the way pups always do, and the day closes the way days close in the season, with the last light sitting long and level on a quiet world. But those 2 seconds have happened. They are a fact now, unretractable. Day 2. The morning follows a similar pattern. The alpha rises, marks, surveys. The subordinate male approaches. The arc, the body posture, the deference. Except now it is not 2 seconds. Now it is closer to 4, the body held upright a little longer, a little more precisely, the eyes holding the alpha's eyes a little more steadily before the head drops. The alpha notices this time. He responds, not aggressively, but firmly. A stiffening of the shoulders, a slight raise of the tail. The subordinate male completes his deference cleanly, and the moment resolves. But it required a response this time. The previous morning it had not. Day 3 brings the first of what researchers who study these behaviors have come to call probe encounters. A probe encounter is not a challenge. It does not look like a challenge from a distance. It looks like 2 animals occupying the same space with a slightly different allocation of attention than usual. The subordinate male approaches the alpha's mate with a boldness that is technically within acceptable parameters. He does not crowd her. He does not behave aggressively. But he approaches from an angle that, in the precise spatial language of pack hierarchy, edges toward an assertion rather than a request for acknowledgement. The alpha's mate stiffens. She makes a brief, sharp vocalization. The subordinate male retreats immediately. No conflict, no escalation. But a line has been approached, and both the alpha and every other adult in the pack has registered it. By day 3, this is no longer about 2 seconds of held posture. Something is building that has its own momentum now. On day 4, the pack goes out to hunt, and the alpha's decision-making is, for the first time, not followed unanimously. They have been tracking a small group of impalas moving toward the drainage line. The alpha signals to swing wide and approach from the east, using the tree cover. Most of the pack begins to shift in that direction, but the subordinate male pauses. He stands where he is and looks toward the south, where a different angle of approach is available. After 3 seconds, 2 other adults slow and look toward him. Then they look at the alpha. Then they begin to follow the alpha's direction after all. It is a minuscule hesitation, unremarkable to anyone not paying the closest kind of attention, but the pack has, for the first time in this alpha's 4-year leadership, experienced a moment where a decision point had a pause in it. Where the instruction and the following were not simultaneous, where the middle ground between the old way and some possible new way was briefly, unmistakably visible. The hunt is successful regardless, but it does not feel the same as it did before. Something has been inserted between the signal and the response, and that something has a name in the language of pack dynamics. It is called consideration. And once an animal begins to consider whether to follow rather than simply following, the architecture has already begun to change. Day 5 is a rest day, if days in the life of a painted wolf pack can be called that. They move short distances, sleep through the midday heat, regroup, groom, play with the pups. These social hours are when hierarchy is reinforced and displayed and practiced most intensively. The rituals of greeting, of submission, of acknowledgement, these play out dozens of times across the course of an afternoon, and each repetition is a small vote being cast for the existing order. On this day, the votes are slightly different. 2 of the younger adult males who typically greet the alpha with an enthusiastic, clearly submissive ritual still greet him submissively, but their enthusiasm has a slight flatness to it, the kind of flatness that might mean nothing, the kind of flatness that might mean they are waiting to see something before they reinvest. The alpha spends more time than usual moving through the group, initiating contact, reaffirming bonds. He approaches the pups repeatedly, engaging them in play that is less about the pups and more about being seen to engage. He is more present today, more deliberate. He has understood something at whatever level of understanding is available to an animal operating on instinct and accumulated experience and the continuous reading of social signals. He has understood that the foundation requires attention. He spends the better part of the late afternoon reinforcing his bond with his mate. They groom, they rest close together, they move through the camp in a way that reminds every other animal in the pack where the center of gravity lies. This is not performance exactly, but it is also not unconscious. It is an alpha, doing what alphas do when the territory of their authority requires maintenance rather than defense. Day 6 is when the subordinate male makes his first direct spatial challenge. The pack is feeding on the remains of an impala from the previous evening, a carcass stripped to the point where there is very little left. The alpha is at the carcass. The subordinate male approaches and, instead of waiting at the edge of the feeding circle, he moves to a position directly alongside the alpha, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, but within a body width, at a carcass. In a painted wolf pack, this is not ambiguous. The spatial boundaries around an alpha at a food source are among the most clearly defined and reliably respected elements of pack behavior. The subordinate male has walked through one of those boundaries and is standing inside it. The alpha's response is immediate. He swings to face the subordinate male full on, tail high, ears fully forward. He is not attacking. He is stating. His body is one complete, unambiguous statement of rank, every signal pointing in the same direction, every posture element reinforcing every other. The subordinate male meets his gaze. He holds it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then he drops his head and backs away. Classic submission. Clean resolution. But that is 6 seconds of direct eye contact between an alpha and a challenging subordinate at a food source. 6 seconds is a geological epoch in this context. An animal that accepts its rank without reservation does not hold that gaze for 6 seconds. An animal that has begun to wonder whether the rank is still truly settled holds it for exactly that long. The rest of the pack, spread across the feeding area, has watched every second of it. Day 7. A territorial dispute arrives from outside the pack. A neighboring pack, slightly smaller, has been moving along the boundary of the territory for 2 days. On the morning of Day 7, 3 of them cross the boundary. This is not an accident. Territorial incursion among painted wolves is never accidental. They know exactly where the lines are. For the alpha, this is both a crisis and an opportunity. A clear, external threat is exactly the kind of event that resets hierarchy. When the danger comes from outside, internal uncertainty collapses back into solidarity. Every pack member needs the alpha to perform precisely now, to lead the response. He does. He moves to the boundary with a directness and speed that pulls the pack behind him in his wake. The territorial display that follows is everything an alpha territorial display should be. Vocalization, scent marking, body posture at full assertion, a pursuit that chases the intruders back across the boundary without committing to a damaging confrontation. The intruders retreat, the boundary is restored. The pack's cohesion in the aftermath of this is temporarily, genuinely, fully restored. They regroup in the warm late morning, make contact, vocalize the high-pitched, almost bird-like calls that painted wolves use after successful territorial assertions. There is a collective release of tension, a kind of social relief that expresses itself as warmth and contact and noise. And for a few hours you might be forgiven for thinking the preceding 6 days had been erased, that the structure was back to what it had been, that the questions had been answered. But they had not been answered. They had only been suspended. Day 8. The morning begins normally. The alpha rises, marks, surveys. He moves through the camp, greeting individuals, reinforcing bonds in the way the previous day's events have made sharper and more deliberate. He is present. He is visible. He is doing everything an alpha does. But when he moves to the eastern edge of the camp to scan the landscape for the morning, the subordinate male does not perform his usual deferential approach. He does not approach at all. He remains where he is, 30 meters away, and watches the alpha scan the horizon. This is a subtraction rather than an addition. The subordinate male is not doing something aggressive. He is simply not doing something deferential. He is declining to perform one of the small daily rituals of acknowledged hierarchy. He is not walking toward the alpha with his body low and his tail inward. He is standing and watching. The alpha looks back over his shoulder. He and the subordinate male make eye contact across the 30 meters of open ground. The alpha holds it for a long moment. Then he turns back to the horizon. 2 adult females in the pack watch this exchange and look at each other. Then they look at the subordinate male. Then they go back to grooming the pups. This is what Day 8 looks like. Not a fight. Not a dramatic confrontation. 2 animals standing 30 meters apart, each choosing a different posture. One of them declining to perform a ritual that has been performed every single morning for 2 years. That is the shape of the day. Everything else that happens is built around that single omission. Day 9. Something new arrives in the morning, not an external event, something internal to the pack, something that appears to have been decided in whatever medium these animals use to make collective decisions. The subordinate male is no longer alone in his quiet testing of the architecture. The two adult females who watched the exchange on day 8, and one of the younger adult males who had been showing that slight flatness of enthusiasm, these three animals are now orbiting the subordinate male with an attentiveness that was not there a week ago. They position themselves near him during the morning rest. When he moves, one or two of them tend to shift in his direction. Their behavior toward the alpha has not become overtly disrespectful, but the quality of their attention has redistributed. The alpha understands this. It would be impossible not to. He has been reading social signals every day of his life for 4 years of leadership, and more years before that. He knows what it looks like when an audience begins to transfer its attention from one performer to another. For most of day 9, he responds by increasing his activity. He initiates a midday hunt, which is unusual, painted wolves typically hunting in the cooler morning and evening hours. He leads it well, and the pack follows, and they run down a young wildebeest on a flat stretch of ground near the drainage line. The kill is clean, and the feeding begins. The alpha takes his position at the carcass with a precision and deliberateness that makes clear this is not simply eating. This is a statement. The subordinate male approaches. He takes a position at the carcass that is not as directly challenging as the shoulder-to-shoulder position of day 6. But it is not the traditional subordinate position either. It is somewhere in the space between, a spatial grammar that has no clean precedent in the pack's history, a position that says, I am not yet challenging you, but I am no longer simply deferring. The alpha does not challenge this directly, and this is, perhaps, the most significant thing that happens in all 9 days. He does not challenge it. He moves slightly, not away, not in clear concession, but he creates space around himself rather than defending the space, and the distinction is one that every animal at that carcass registers. Defending space is what an alpha does from a position of complete security. Creating space is what an animal does when it is choosing to avoid a confrontation it is not certain of winning. 9 days. 9 days of 2-second pauses and 6-second gazes, and shoulder-to-shoulder proximity, and morning rituals declined, and audiences redistributed. 9 days of a question being asked in the quietest possible language, repeated and refined and made incrementally louder, until on the afternoon of the 9th day, it is no longer a quiet question. It is a claim. The 10th morning begins before first light. The temperature before the sun comes is the coldest it has been in several weeks, and the pack is pressed together in the tight huddle they form when warmth is necessary. The pups are in the center, the adults around them, bodies overlapping, the whole group breathing slowly in the dark. When the light begins to change, bodies begin to stir. The subordinate male rises first. This has never happened before. In 4 years of the alpha's leadership, the alpha has always been the first to rise. Not always dramatically so. Not always by a wide margin, but always first. The pack has organized its mornings around that first rising, the way a household might organize its mornings around the sound of a first kettle boiling. It is simply the shape of things. The subordinate male rises first. He stretches. He walks to the nearest acacia and scent marks it. Then he walks to the eastern edge of the camp and stands, looking out at the landscape. He is doing what the alpha does. He is doing it in the place the alpha does it. He is doing it in the full view of every other animal in the pack. The alpha wakes 3 minutes later. He rises, looks across the camp, and sees the subordinate male standing at the eastern edge. He stands still for a long moment. His tail is up, his ears are forward. He is the picture of an alpha. Every physical signal he is capable of making is being made. Then he begins to walk toward the subordinate male. What follows is not a fight. Painted wolf leadership transitions almost never are. What follows is a confrontation that plays out through posture and proximity and the precise, high-resolution language of mammalian social signaling. The alpha approaches and the subordinate male does not curve away, does not drop his body, does not pull his tail in. He stands and holds the position. He holds the gaze. They stand facing each other for what researchers documenting these events have estimated at approximately 40 seconds. 40 seconds of two animals measuring each other against the full weight of 9 days and 4 years and whatever calibration an animal of this kind carries inside its body, about where its own strength sits relative to the strength of the animal in front of it. Then the alpha looks away. Not in defeat, exactly. Not in any simple or single way. But the break comes from him. His tail drops a fraction. His ears angle slightly back. His body softens by a degree that, in any other animal in any other context, would be almost invisible. But in this context, in this precise social language, it is a sentence. It says, I know what this is. The The subordinate male holds his position for another few seconds. Then, slowly, he begins to move through the camp. He does not run. He does not perform any dramatic assertion. He simply moves, and as he moves, the two females who have been watching fall in behind him. Then the younger adult male. Then a second. Then a third. The alpha stands at the edge of the camp and watches. His mate comes to him. She makes contact. She remains beside him. Their bond does not dissolve. These things almost never dissolve completely. The relationships within a pack are too complex and too long-standing to be simply reorganized by a single morning event. The former alpha and his mate will remain members of this pack. They will hunt together. They will help raise the pups. They will fill roles that matter. But the shape of the mornings has changed. The animal who rises first has changed. The animal that the others follow has changed. It took 9 days to get here. 9 days of observation so precise that it defied anything a casual observer would have recognized as observation at all. 9 days of incremental pressure applied at the exact joints where the architecture was weakest. 9 days of patience that is almost incomprehensible when you consider that the animals exercising it do not plan in the human sense, do not sit down and decide on a strategy, do not mark calendars or hold councils or draft intentions. They simply feel. They feel the quality of the leadership above them with the same continuous sensitivity that they feel temperature and scent and sound. And when the quality begins to change, they begin to feel toward the change, the way water feels toward lower ground. Not because they have decided to, because the feeling has its own direction and its own momentum. What the painted wolves of this pack demonstrated over those 9 days is one of the most concentrated expressions of social intelligence that the animal world produces. Not the intelligence of problem solving. Not the intelligence of tool use or communication or navigational memory, though painted wolves have those too in their own forms. This is the intelligence of relationship, the intelligence of knowing where you are in a web of other lives, and knowing, with precision, when the web is shifting. There is something here that goes beyond what most of us think of when we think about animal behavior. We tend to think of animal hierarchies as blunt instruments. The strongest wins, the most aggressive dominates, the biggest body at the top of the pile. And in some systems, in some contexts, that is accurate enough to be useful. But it is not what happens here. What happens here is more like what happens in any complex social system where power is not solely about physical capacity, where it is about credibility, about consistency, about the continuous, daily, accumulated performance of being someone that others trust to lead them through uncertainty. An alpha in a painted wolf pack does not simply have power. An alpha earns it back every single day. Every morning rise, every hunt decision, every territorial response, every feeding behavior, every choice about when to assert and when to absorb. All of it is a vote being cast in a continuous, living referendum on whether the person at the top is still the right person for the job. And the pack votes with its attention, with the quality and speed and completeness of its deference, with how quickly it follows and from what direction it watches, and how long it holds its gaze before looking away. The alpha in this story did not lose because he was attacked. He did not lose because a younger, stronger animal overwhelmed him in combat. He lost because the referendum produced a different result. Because the votes, accumulated over 9 careful days of observation and testing and quiet, incremental renegotiation, came out differently than they had for 4 years. He lost because the pack stopped being certain about him, and in the world of painted wolves, certainty is everything. It is the currency that an alpha trades in, the only currency that matters. You cannot lead animals who are not certain of you. You can coerce them temporarily. You can frighten them, but you cannot lead them. And painted wolves are animals who need to be led rather than coerced, who need their alpha to be the most competent and consistent and reliable expression of pack will available in the group at any given time. When that expression became slightly less consistent, the pack did not panic. It did not immediately reorganize. It watched. It waited. It applied careful, calibrated pressure to specific points in the structure and measured the responses. It gave the alpha opportunity after opportunity to reassert in ways that would have resolved the question. The territorial incursion on day 7 was almost enough. Almost. But almost is not enough. Almost is still uncertainty. And uncertainty, once it has entered the system, has its own logic and its own direction. There is a deeper lesson in those 9 days that is worth sitting with. The subordinate male who became the new alpha did not begin day one with a plan. There is no evidence to suggest, and good scientific reason to doubt, that any animal of this kind begins a process like this with a conscious intention toward a specific outcome. What he began day one with was something more primitive and more fundamental than a plan. He began it with a feeling that something in the structure above him had changed, that the weight of the architecture was resting on a joint that was slightly less solid than it had been. And he pushed on that joint, lightly at first, and it moved a little, and so he pushed again. Each day's test was calibrated by the response to the previous day's test. 2 seconds of held posture tells you something. 4 seconds tells you more. 6 seconds of eye contact at a carcass tells you more still. An alpha who moves to create space rather than defend it tells you something that 9 days of smaller signals have been building toward. This is intelligence, operating below the threshold of what we typically call intelligence. Operating in the body rather than in the mind. In the nerve endings and the muscle tension, and the precise, continuously updated calculations of proximity and gaze and postural signal that animals of this kind perform thousands of times a day without any apparent reflection at all. And it produces, over 9 days, a result that a human strategist deliberating for 9 days could not have achieved more cleanly. Watch a painted wolf pack for long enough, and you will start to understand something about the nature of social structure that is difficult to arrive at from any other direction. Social structure is not a thing that exists and then is challenged and either survives or doesn't. Social structure is a thing that is being created, continuously, by the behavior of every animal in the system, at every moment. It is not a building, it is a fire. And like a fire, it requires constant fuel to keep burning. The fuel is the daily behavior of every individual, the small rituals and the clear responses, and the consistent performances of role. When any of those fuels becomes inconsistent, the fire does not immediately go out, but it begins to change color, and the animals around it feel the change in heat long before the light changes. The alpha's weakness was not a physical one, though it may have begun with a physical process, with some accumulated fatigue or an injury that was healing, with some internal state that the pack read in his behavior before it was visible in his body. His weakness was a weakness in the quality of his performance of leadership, in the small daily rituals of dominance, in the micro-level consistency that an alpha depends on more than any single act of impressive capacity. And the pack, being a system of extraordinary social sensitivity, read that weakness in the exact language in which it was expressed, not in dramatic failure, in small, almost imperceptible lapses, in 2-second pauses and slight adjustments of angle and the quality of attention during a morning survey. It read those things, and it calibrated its response accordingly, slowly, carefully, with a patience that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. For 9 days it looked like nothing at all, and then on the 10th morning, an animal rose first, who had never risen first before, and he walked to the eastern edge of the camp and stood in the alpha's place, looking out at the same landscape the alpha had looked out at for 4 years. And the pack arranged itself around him. Not all at once, not all of them, not without complication or residual loyalty or the inevitable messiness of a structure that has been reorganized rather than replaced. The former alpha was still there. His mate was still his mate. The bonds that 4 years of shared hunting and shared danger and shared food had built between him and his packmates were not erased by a morning, but the question had been answered. The referendum had produced its result. And in the days that followed, as the pack went out each morning and hunted through the dry season and brought food back and fed the pups and navigated the territorial boundaries of their world, it was the new alpha who rose first. It was the new alpha who stood at the edge of the camp in the early light and read the landscape. It was behind the new alpha that the others gathered before a hunt. And the old alpha, the animal who had led this pack for 4 years, who had fed them and directed them and held the structure of their world together through dry seasons and wet seasons and territorial challenges and pup rearing and all the 1,000 daily acts of leadership that no one sees until they are absent. He took his place in the pack that had once arranged itself around him, and he hunted in the place behind the leader rather than at its head. He remained. That is worth saying clearly. He did not leave. He was not driven out. He was not killed or injured or cast from the group in the way that displacement sometimes happens in other species. He remained as a functional, valued, contributing member of a pack that had shifted its center of gravity from him to another animal. That is how painted wolves do it. That is what 9 days of careful, patient, attentive pressure produces. Not a rupture, but a reorganization, not a war, but an election. And like the best elections, it left the structure standing. It left the group intact. It left everyone with a role and a purpose and a position within a collective that could still, together, do what it needed to do to survive. The sophistication of this outcome is, if you look at it clearly, as remarkable as anything in the natural world. The subordinate male got what he wanted without destroying what he needed. He needed the pack intact. He needed the existing social bonds to remain functional. He needed his predecessor to stay and hunt and contribute, because an 11-animal pack functions better than an 8-animal pack, and driving the former alpha out would have reduced the pack by at least 3 animals, counting the mate and any animals whose loyalty ran deep enough to follow. He got what he wanted in the way that preserved what he needed. 9 days. The dry season continued. The rains eventually came. The pups grew. The pack survived the season, and the next season, and the one after that. The new alpha-led hunts that the pack followed with the full, unhesitating cohesion that defines this species at its best. The former alpha ran alongside the others, a good distance behind the lead, but fully present, fully committed, a full member of the group that had once been his and was now something else, and still, in some way that does not reduce to simple ownership or simple loss, still partly his. The landscape doesn't record any of this. The dry grassland where it happened looks the same as it always did. The acacias along the drainage line do not remember. The impala and the wildebeest whose lives intersect with the pack's life do not know that the animal running the hunt has changed. The territorial boundaries are the same boundaries. The scent marks along them are refreshed by a different set of glands now, but they mark the same perimeter. Only the pack knows. And the pack has moved on, as packs do, as living systems do, carrying the change forward in the changed arrangement of their mornings and their hunts and their social rituals, the change folded into the ongoing life of the group, so completely that a new observer arriving today would see only a pack doing what packs do, moving together, hunting together, feeding